Those of you that are regular listeners know that last time we talked about Paul's journey from starting a practice from scratch. And if I remember right, 2012?
Yeah, that's correct.
Starting a practice from scratch in 2012 and developing that practice over time to eventually selling to a DSO in what I think is a fairly short period of time when you look at your start to that transition to a DSO. And I thought it might be useful to continue that conversation and talk more about your thought process. There's a lot of activity today in the dental profession of DSOs acquiring practices. And I imagine that there's many of our listeners who would like to know more about that exercise and more about maybe your own thought process as you went through that process and what your experience was, what things you looked at, what was the good, bad, and ugly of that process. And I thought we might just have a fun conversation around that.
I think it's unavoidable. I mean, everybody is talking about it because you can't avoid the conversations. So I think it's, even for somebody who's not even interested in it, it's still good to know.
Well, I have a wonderful mentor, and many of you have heard me talk about Dr. Omer Reed. Paul, do you remember that name, Dr. Omer Reed? Do you remember?
From you, I remember. I've never met. Yeah.
Just an amazing mentor. We lost Dr. Reed in 2019. He passed at the age of 87, but just such a wonderful mentor. And one of the things he said, because a lot of times he'd get questions from baited questions from the audience. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And he always said, I love this quote. He said, "Don't be down on what you're not up on." Don't be down. And that came up very specifically when Dr. Reed, later in his career, he was invited to be a clinical instructor at LVI, the Las Vegas Institute. And one of the areas that LVI kind of had pioneered is the idea of neuromuscular dentistry. And they pioneered kind of a different way of treating occlusion. There's traditional occlusion as taught, as we think of as taught by many people, but I think of Peter Dawson, and I think of, CR, CO, format of treating occlusion. And Bill Dickerson and others used that method, but they also taught neuromuscular dentistry. And there were a lot of people say, "Oh, neuromuscular dentistry is a bunch of nonsense, and Omer would say, "Well, don't be down on what you're not up on. Go peek under the tent, see what it's about, because there may be a patient that this method of treating them may be more effective." And I love that approach. Don't be down on what you're not up on. And I think
I'm going to work that in my lexicon. It's going to make its way in.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of dentists that aren't up on, what's going on in the DSO world. And it's kind of easy to, shoot arrows, at what we're not up on. And so you have some inside experience from your own journey. I thought our listeners would really benefit from. So start wherever you like, but let's have a conversation around that.
Yeah, I guess I'll start just saying what initially brought me to consider the sale was having a large practice, having a large team. And I want to say, like, it was probably maybe the wrong reasons. It was burnout. I was feeling burnout. We went and we shut down for 2020, and I just loved that load off. I just loved taking that load off my shoulders. When we were home,
Paul, you weren't the only one that found that shutdown time as actually being a wonderful break from the merry-go-round. It wasn't, we didn't wish it. We wouldn't have wished that on anyone, but there were many dentists that felt like, wow, I get to breathe a little bit. I'm off the merry-go-round. I wish it wasn't under these circumstances, but for the first time in a long time, I have a chance to think about things. I have a chance to think about what the future might be like. I have a chance to think about what I like about my practice, what I don't like. And I'd like to make some changes moving forward as we come out of this. And it's sad that it was a forced, a forced shutdown, but I actually think it was restorative for many dentists.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's changed the whole psyche of just, I mean, the culture of everything. I mean, everybody has changed. I mean, just the way they look at stuff and just the way they feel about fulfillment and what they're doing with their life. And
Maybe it's the fragility
good,
of all of it, Paul, that,
right.
um, I'd like to think we're all immortal and we're strong and resilient. And I think in some ways, COVID-19 put a spotlight on the fragility of all of this.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah. So I mean, we shut down, and I would say I had a good leadership structure at my office. We had a large office. I think at the time we shut down, we might have been doing, I mean, we had a big office, multi-doctor, and I don't need to talk numbers, but we had a lot of people. And when I had a leadership structure, I felt like they ran everything. I felt like I did very little. I felt like there was not too much stress with it, and I was manageable. And then when we shut down, when it was gone, I said, oh my gosh, like this is really, to have this gone is so much better. And not to have the practice gone, because, and I'll talk about that a little bit, but just to have that stress gone. I mean, that's what it was. But like right then I was looking, it's the practice. I need to get rid of the practice. So when we came back from COVID, I kind of said, I'm doing things differently. I want that. I want to eat dinner with my family. I want to be done working by 4 o'clock. I want to be able to shut it off. I want to be able to compartmentalize and
It's a
leave
new
work at
day,
work. Yeah. So
right?
I
Like
want to do
kind of like
things
it's a new
differently.
day. The way I was working before,
Yeah,
isn't how I want to work, moving forward. Um,
absolutely.
Paul, I had a very personal experience with that
Uh-huh.
myself in my work. For many years, I was the proverbial road warrior.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
I'd leave on an early morning flight on Monday morning. I called it "Oh Dark 30" because that's what it was.
Yeah.
I'd leave "Oh Dark 30." I'd fly somewhere in the country. I would visit clients. I'd fly around, in the area where I was during the week, and I might come home Friday night if I wasn't speaking at a conference on Friday. If I was speaking or on Saturday, if I was speaking at a conference on Saturday, then I'd have to extend that, and I'd be out on the road. I left on Monday; it's now Saturday. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I might not be able to get home Saturday night because the airlines have fewer flights on Saturday night.
Mm-hmm.
If I could, I'd get home Saturday night. If not, I'd get home on Sunday and start it all over again on Monday.
Yeah.
And I did that for 40 years. And COVID for me had me look at it, inside and say, what do I want to change? What do I want to do differently that would enhance quality of life, allow me to still serve my clients and do what I love, but also improve quality of life. I'm kind of hearing you say the same thing. You still love doing
Yeah.
dentistry, love taking care of patients, but you also want to be home for dinner.
Well, and it's true. Like I was working with a life coach at the time. And if anyone's saying, like, what is a life coach and why do you need a coach for life? I think you don't be down on what you're not up on.
There you go.
Right, there we
You
go. It just
found you
got,
found a perfect
yeah.
application already.
Yeah. And so, but I remember she asked me, she said, when you're at work, and because so I said I was going to come back with a different attitude and I was going to do things differently. Now, when we reopened up, there was all these protocols and we had just to get
Right.
through that period before. And I think it was maybe 6 to 8 months before we were getting back to business. But when we got back to like normal and routine and it felt like it was going again, um, she asked me, she said, out of your week, Monday through Friday, just don't take the weekends out of it, but out of your week, how much time is spent doing things that bring you joy and how much, like what percentage is bringing you joy? And I said, gosh, probably got to be maybe 20-30%. And she said, that's a really sad number. We got to do something about that. And then we started focusing on what bring me joy and what's not bringing me joy. And one of the things was, it was the practice stress. It was this, because I really care about my team. I really care about my practice and I really care about how things are running. And as you grow a big team, it becomes very difficult to have everyone be happy like it is, or at least like my experience was when I had a smaller team. And I would take that very personally. So I started looking at financials. I started saying, okay, well, I got this really big practice, big numbers. Some DSO could probably pay something decent for it. What do I have in the bank? What do I have invested? And what I found was that I could get to my number that was always this elusive number that one day I was going to hit if I sold my practice.
Paul,
So
the larger your practice gets,
yeah,
the smaller in the conventional way of selling a practice, the conventional way that's been age old, in dentistry is you find a broker and the practice gets sold to another dentist, as your successor.
yeah,
That's the conventional way of doing it. And the larger your practice gets, the smaller the universe of potential buyers are.
Yeah.
And so
I mean, there was no way to sell it.
yeah, and you look at it and you think, well, this is something, well, I've developed something very useful, very valuable. And yet the universe of buyers, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller to the point where there aren't any on that.
Yeah.
Now, I also want to say, and this is my opinion, I'd love your perspective on it too. Well, I think the way dental offices have been traditionally valued, when you look at valuation, traditionally in the traditional sales model, find a broker, sell your practice, sell it to another dentist as a job. I think the valuation has never really reflected the actual value of the practice. I think they've been undervalued. At the time we're recording this, Paul, and I have to put the date on it because it'll change over time. But at the time we're recording this, depending on where you are in the country, if you sell your practice the traditional way, it's typically worth, again, I'm assuming you have some up-to-date equipment and that sort of thing. It's typically worth about 90% of your average annual collections averaged over the last 3 years. Would that match up your awareness of traditional valuation method?
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate.
Yeah,
I'd
maybe
say
it's
sometimes
between
it's like 70 to 90.
Yeah. And I might even say 80 to 100, depending on if you're in a favorable area, it might be as high as 100%. Of, very desirable area with the right, the right case mix in your practice, the right systems, the right team, and so on. But I think about that and I think, I would think that business would be worth more than that. When you look at how other businesses are valued.
Well, then we look at real estate.
Look
at an apartment building that's, a 5% annual return. You call this a 5 cap, that would sell at a 20x multiple of the revenue or of the profit.
A completely different way of looking at the value of that business.
Yeah.
And really that's what DSOs have brought to the equation is they brought a different valuation model in it. And, the ADA shares, this is a sad statistic. So don't shoot the messenger. This comes from the ADA. But the most recent data I have comes from 2019. But in 2019, the ADA said only 3% of dentists age 65 can retire without reducing their lifestyle.
Yeah.
Now that makes me sad.
Right.
Well, dentists, you guys deserve more than this. I look at the commitment you've made, to your career, to your patients, to your team, to your community. You deserve better than that. Now, granted, there is that may not be the best definition. So without reducing their lifestyle, well, where's their lifestyle? So maybe there's errors in that. But I think dentists deserve to retire with dignity. And if you're only going to get 1 year, 90% or 1 year's worth of your production or practice, that doesn't strike me as really being the true value of something you've given heart and soul to for all these years.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's true. That's why I love what DSOs have brought to it. They're looking at it as an asset,
right.
Which it is. It is an asset that generates revenue. And, we're in it for the right reasons. We want to help our patients be healthy. We want to provide a good experience. And I mean, one of our mottos and one of our missions is that we want to change what people perceive as like going to the dentist feels like. That's what we've always used as our core value. Right. But it is something that generates revenue. And I think that's what they're realizing. And I think we're in the second wave, of this DSO thing, because everyone thought, well, you just put these practices together. You put them together and you turn around and you sell them to some private equity group and they're going to say, oh, and you get this big multiple and you make this big windfall of cash. And what
that was, let's call that DSO 1.0.
Yeah, that's 1.0. And what we've seen in this past year, and especially with like the interest rates and just kind of the climate, is that there are groups, and I'll explain this for listeners, is that you package these up and they do a recapitalization where they sell their assets and debt to a new buyer who is going to buy a portion of that equity. And then they're also going to help finance future acquisitions. But they have found that some of these companies have went to market and nobody wants to buy them because the numbers aren't good, because you can't grow a solid business based on just acquiring practices.
Well, let's come back to something you're familiar with, which is real estate. there has been time in the, say, commercial world. Let's talk about multi-units apartments.
Yeah.
There's been times where just buy anything. It doesn't matter. Just buy any, buy 4 units, 6 units, 8 units. It doesn't matter. A good neighborhood, middle-class neighborhood, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Is that an accurate statement? There are periods of time where it almost didn't matter. But over time, it gets more important to evaluate the asset deeper than that. And you have to look under a magnifying glass and make sure that what you're buying meets certain qualities that you're looking for. And maybe that's where we are now in, DSOs 2.0.
That's what I think we are.
Initially, what would you say the time period is of, from DSOs kind of coming on the scene when just putting practices together, anything could kind of work? What would you put the time horizon on that?
I'm not really, it was never on my radar until about 3 years ago.
Okay.
When I did this. So I would say that my idea of this big exit was like to one day I'm going to own multiple practices maybe, and I'll get maybe 3-4 together. I'll sell them for a 12x multiple, and then I'll ride off into the sunset. And then
so the guy that isn't
more,
getting home for dinner thinks it's a good idea to have 4 or 5 practices.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. No kidding.
Wait, did my sarcasm come out there?
Yeah. I got it a little bit.
What about that changed your mind?
Yeah. But I was just saying, like,
can we be honest about this, Paul?
Yeah.
There's nothing easy about managing a practice.
No,
there's nothing easy about it. I mean, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in HR, in truly, leading and managing a team. And the larger your practice gets, but I've had some of the same thoughts. If one practice is good, 2 would be really good, right? And then 3 would be like ecstatic. That would be fantastic, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Or would it?
Right.
Well, I had Mark Costas. Mark's a friend. I had Mark Costas on a number of years ago on the podcast, and I was talking to Mark ahead of time in the pre-production. I said, I think at the time Mark owned 14 practices. And I said, Mark, I want to talk about the joys of owning, the joys and benefits of owning multiple practices. He said, can we change the title to the pain and aggravation of owning multiple practices? And he wasn't kidding. And we joked about it. And I said, well, let's make it a balanced discussion of, the benefits and what's the reality downside, as well. But man, there's been times where, it takes every ounce of your energy to manage a practice.
Yeah.
Beyond doing the clinical dentistry, right?
Right. And it's like, I remember I bought my first apartment building. This was a 6 unit, and I decided I was going to manage it myself because I wanted to, not that I wanted to manage it myself, but I wanted to know what that was like. I wanted to experience.
You want to have the experience.
Yeah. And I remember just every time my phone would ding, I would say, oh gosh, is that a tenant? Is there something, did the water, did something break?
Toilet's clogged.
And yeah, right.
Right.
And that's how I felt about my practice, is that I had to put up these really strict boundaries that I told my team. I was on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday schedule. I was off Thursday through Sunday. And I told them, I said, do not call me. Do not bother me. Thursday through Sunday, I'm unavailable. I don't even care if it's burning down. I don't want to know. And I had to put up these very strict boundaries. And what was going on is I would, have all the stress Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then Thursday through Saturday, Sunday, I just forget about it. And it's a bad way to live. Like, you want to combine your work and your life and your passion. And I don't think I was really gripping that. And when we shut down, it was very apparent to me that something needed to change.
That was sort of the opportunity to really see some things objectively.
Yes, absolutely. So it was, so I went back and I said, what can we get? So I started talking to different groups, and there's all sorts of groups, and there's ones, and I think DSOs get a really bad rep, and I think deservedly so. Certain ones should. And I think there's some really
there may
ones.
be some listeners, and I want to diffuse it here. There may be some listeners that think that DSOs are the devil incarnate. I would like to share my perspective on this, and Paul, I'd be interested in yours. My perspective is, let's look at private practice dentists. Among private practice dentists, there's some really, really good ones, and there's some okay ones, and there's some not so much.
Right.
Among DSOs, is it possible that same comparison could be made? There's some good DSOs, there's some okay ones, and there's some we should run away from. Is that a fair, very broad analysis. Is that fair?
I think that's absolutely fair. And I think we see on Facebook forums often that it all gets lumped into one category, which
Yeah.
is unfair, but this is how people feel. And that's okay. They can feel like that. But this was something that was important to me. Now, I came from my associateship before I opened my practice, a very busy, larger office, a lot of managed care, a lot of HMOs. So we ran like crazy. And one of the things that made me open my office is I just wanted to have a different culture, a different level of management.
You saw
And
another way in that you didn't especially enjoy, and you wanted
right.
to do something different.
Yeah. And there was this part of me that said, I'm letting my team down by doing this, and I can't do this to them. I cannot change the practice like this. I can't have somebody coming in here telling us what to do and making it all like, quote, corporate.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal for me looking for someone to buy my practice. And I talked to, I'll just share like, because people are going to be wondering, but I ended up partnering with MB2, but I
Right.
talked with a lot of different DSOs, and I'm not going to mention anybody else, but there are some that were the deals were very, hey, look at this big multiple we're going to give you, but it's going to come later. It's going to be on the back end. If you reach this, and this EBITDA goals, if you reach this, if you do the jump through these hoops. And there was a
So
lot of
really
them that were,
rolling the
yeah,
dice, hoping something was going to happen in the future. Um,
yes.
without names, how many did you take a look at in terms of actually
Um,
looking under the tent at DSOs?
Right. So I had a broker, the deal that I did with my actual deal, that was without a broker because that was the first company I reached out to.
Yeah.
So that one broker didn't get that. That was in our contract.
Right.
But broker shot me to maybe 30. And I want to say I talked on the phone with 9, and I got pretty far in negotiations with 3.
Okay. Uh, cool. That's actually, I think, would be very useful information for our listeners. I would say, pretty thorough, man. You didn't just,
Yeah.
you didn't marry the first DSO you dated.
Well, I wanted to, but I felt like it would have been like I had to do more research.
Yeah.
I was like, I have to find out what else is out there. But it's interesting because a lot of them, it was like, hey, we're just going to give you stock in the company. That's all we're going to give you. And then you're rolling your dice. You're saying, I don't even know what this company does. I don't even know what kind of structure you have. So that seems a little dangerous to me. And then there's other ones where they were very, to me, they came off as, once we get your practice and you start doing things our way, when we get in there and we put our systems in there and train you, man, watch your practice grow. And my practice was doing great. I didn't need systems. I didn't want anyone to come in and tell me what to do. And I do not want a manager. I think I was a crappy associate. I don't work well with managers. I like to do things my way. I don't know if that makes me sound not emotionally intelligent, but I can say that enough that I know that I like things the way I want to do them. And I would not do well in a practice like that. And I just don't think I could have did that to my team. So,
Yeah.
what was big
Well, I
for
know,
me
and
was,
Paul, I know you and I have known each other for a long time. I know one of the absolutes for you is the quality of care, how you're taking care of your patients. You're not going to
right,
compromise that. You want to take care of my perspective is you provide the care to your patients that you would like provided to you or a loved one. Is that
right.
accurate?
Yeah,
That's my perception.
I would
And
say, yeah, 100%.
that may not fly with some, bean counters,
Well,
in
yeah.
terms of,
Quotas. Like
yeah,
I didn't
yeah,
want quotas. I didn't want like production goals. I didn't want any of that stuff.
yeah.
I wanted to run my practice. And even though, like, I will tell you, so this is coming up. We're recording this in December of 23. 3 days ago was my last day of my contract. So if I wanted to walk away from my practice at this point, I could.
How long
But
were you obligated to stay on board?
I was 3 years. Yeah.
3 years. So
Which I think very common is 5 right now. And that was something that I negotiated. And it was funny because they were like, well, why you want to shorten this? What are you trying to do? You trying to get out of here? I'm like,
right.
no. But I was trying to get out. I want. But over the course of the past 3 years, in what I've realized is that it allowed me to step back because there wasn't so much financial in the practice. I mean, this took a mindset shift to me being like, hey, this should not be as taxing and as important to you because you don't have as much financial on it. And so I backed away and I let my team step up and fill that void a little bit more. And then as they filled it, I became more engaged and got right back into it. But it was
Oh,
for different reasons. It was for
wow.
because I wanted to be there and I realized how much I loved being part of that team.
A little bit of
And
a turnabout.
very much, yeah, very much an epiphany. And people say, well, wow, looking back, do you wish that you would have kept your practice and had this. And I say, absolutely not. I'm so happy that I sold it. And I still own a minority percentage, but it's like I own enough to keep me there to be happy. I'm not doing a ton of clinical. I'm doing about 30 hours a month. So it's like I'm doing 6 5.5 hour days, sometimes 5.5, sometimes 5. And
And
so
that's
it's like
per
my
month.
involved.
Per month.
Yes, that's per
Yeah.
month. Yeah. So and sometimes it's less. Like sometimes I'll take 2 weeks off. I take a lot of time off, but I'm there
Because
because
if
I want to
it was
be
6
there.
5.5 hour days per week, that's different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That probably wouldn't be too bad either, about 6 days still. But you know, I know I want to be there now, and it's a different way of going there. And I don't think keeping my practice would have ever got me there. I don't think I would have been able to make that mindset shift. Now, everything I have now with my quality of life with the practice, I could have had. There's nothing that the DSO is specifically providing that has been life-changing for me. And I will say there are DSOs that are very involved. I have a DSO that's involved as much as I want them to be. And I have a regional manager, and she's great, but I every time she says, let me do something for you, I feel like I do nothing. I say, we're totally cool. We're fine. We got it,
Yeah.
because I want that. And then that's a big part of the group that I'm in. And that's what's important to me. And I'd say my team, if there wasn't another name that shows up on their check in the bank accounts, I think half of them wouldn't even have noticed.
Yeah.
And we didn't lose a lot of people during the transition. We lost some
So,
people this past year because of labor stuff, but
okay.
yeah,
I'm hearing
that
you
was
say that it was kind of a more of a hands-off approach from the DSO.
yeah, like silent DSOs, like
Yeah,
the silent
more of a
partner.
silent side. One of the
Yeah.
fears I think a lot of dentists have is that there'll be forced changes clinically,
Yeah.
forcing you to do something that doesn't align with you clinically. What was your experience there?
Well, my experience there is that they do incentivize you because you get a lot of savings if you use certain labs or use certain suppliers. And that's been something that's come up for a few times for me, is like, hey, have you ever tried any of these labs? And I'm like, I just really like my labs. And I look at the savings and I go, maybe I should. And I'm just like so stuck in my ways. So there has been
But they'll leave you
nothing
alone. In other
clinical.
words, they'll leave you alone.
Yes. Yes. Zero. There is nothing. Nobody's
But
looking
you're
at my perio
incentivized to take a
percentage.
look, like maybe
Yeah.
again on economy of scale,
Yeah.
because they're dealing with many practices. They can say,
There's
hey,
a lot of
we
savings.
can offer
Yeah.
this, but it's not forced. As I'm hearing you say, it's not
No,
not
none of
forced.
it's forced. I mean, like I would say like supply stuff, we switched a lot of it because it was a very significant
Well, if it's a
savings for,
commodity, if it's a
yeah. Yeah,
commodity,
exactly. Commodity.
right? But I don't necessarily think of labs as a commodity. I don't
No,
think of them as
not to
at
me.
all. Not at
No,
all.
no. I know
Um,
my techs and I know who's doing the work,
yeah.
and I like it that way. And
But if you can
that's
save
who
some
we are.
bucks on a box of gloves,
Oh yeah.
a little different
Lots of
story.
bucks. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. So like it, but I would say like anyone thinking about it, like what we said is just you can get out there and you can find it out. I don't think I'm not sure if it's for everybody. I think like MB2 is a group that's more targeted towards larger practices, associate driven practices. They do
Mhm.
some solo docs, but they're cherry picking some of the higher producing ones that are going to have growth. And the benefit is that you get to invest in this company that's going to grow, and you can now get these multiples for your sale that you wouldn't be able to get unless you had multiple practices together.
Which kind of goes
So
back to my critique of the traditional valuation method.
right.
When you take that practice, you sell it, through a broker to a dentist. It's a one-time transaction. There are no recaps. There are no,
Right.
no multiples down the road. That's what you got.